Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and welcome to my publisher's clearinghouse. Yeah! All right, have fun, guys. All right, so now that we've swirled the glass and opened up some of the flavors of the juice, you know, the notes of radical progressive politics and molding young minds, and how that could contribute to this whole mess, I think it's time to get a little deeper into the how of it all, right? Because he had help, right? You can't spread your heretic politics and your subversive romanticism without the means to distribute it, right? And that's where these guys come in, the publishers and booksellers. These are the guys that make all the fake history and fake science possible. The furtherance of knowledge and literacy through education is a very lucrative business for them, right? All these new schools they intend to build need books, right? And these are the guys, or some of them anyway, because there's just too many to get into them all, but these are the guys who control what is published. They are the money men and distribution outfits for the Royal Society and their missionary groups like the Philosophical Breakfast Club and the X Club. These guys are the ones who are either being paid to publish what they publish, are dictating what's being published, or, as I think is most likely, they're told what to publish. Because if they wanted to work above board and avoid paying huge fines or imprisonment, and many of them actually do get arrested for various problems, but if they wanted to avoid much of this imperial entanglement, then they needed to be a member of this guild, the Worshipful Company of Stationers and Newspaper Makers. Right? And we've talked about these livery companies before, especially the drapers. And the Stationers Company was founded in 1403, which is interesting because that's more than 35 years before Gutenberg invents his printing press. So I guess that makes this guild the province of the church and their scriptoriums mostly. Now, I don't know, right? But it's interesting also that they received their royal charter not long after Henry VIII gives the Pope the boot, right? And this is very important, and we're going to come back to it a little bit later. But the Stationers Company held, and perhaps still holds, a monopoly over the publishing industry and was officially responsible for setting and enforcing regulations until 1710, though they still have significant control over the industry after this, and who knows, maybe they even do today, right? Because the company's principal purpose nowadays is to provide an independent forum from where its members can advance the interests, strategic, educational, training, and charitable, of the industries associated with the company. All right, so not the general public, but those paying the bills. And these guilds are ranked by precedence in the order in which they were created. And wouldn't you know it, the Stationers Company is the 47th, which is a coded 11, right? Of course, the stationers are a gateway company, but a gateway for who? And this is where the story of the Stationers Company and all these publishers starts to get interesting, because the Stationers Company is, or was, headquartered on Paternoster Row. And so Paternoster Row was a street in London that, for almost 300 years, was the center of the British publishing trade, right? And it was described as almost synonymous, in quotes, with the book trade, right? And the amazing thing about that is that Paternoster Row is located right in the shadows of St. Paul's Cathedral, the very church that Henry VIII kicks the Pope out of, creating the Church of England, right? And it's the seat of the Bishop of England today. And so here's Paternoster Row on a 1740 map of London. And it gets its name because from a very early period, and this church dates back 1,000 years from this 18th, 19th century time period we're looking at. And so this street is where the monks or whoever made paternosters or prayer beads. And there is record of at least one bookseller during the reign of Henry IV, who was king from 1399 to 1413, that same period when the Stationers Company is formed, right? And though there are a handful of booksellers there before the Great Fire of 1666, it's after that blaze that the row really takes off, which is not long after the Royal Society gets off the ground, conveniently enough. Right? And so not only is the Stationers Company stationed there, but Joseph Johnson, publisher of The Juice and His Bride and possible gay lover of Henry Fuseli, right? He had offices there at one point, and upon his death, he was hailed as the father of the book trade, the most important publisher in England from 1770 to 1810. That's a 40-year span. And he helped shape the thought of his era, not only through his publications and support of innovative writers and thinkers, but also through his dinner parties, which came to be known as Johnson's Circle. It was at one of these gatherings that the Juice met the Undertaker, and where the Undertaker met the man who wrecked her, Joseph Johnson's gay lover, Henry Fuseli. And the most amazing thing about these dinners is where they were held, at his home, which was located at approximately 22 St. Paul's Churchyard. All right, so first, how is this an approximate? Right, and second, not only does he work in the shadow of St. Paul's, he lives there too. All right, so what is going on here with Joseph Johnson? Right, he gets away with figurative and who knows, perhaps even literal murder right in the shadows of St. Paul's Cathedral. Because not only does he publish books that support the U.S. colonists' bid for independence and Jacobin political screeds designed to provoke revolution at home, for which he does do a 6-month stint in a very cozy rich person's prison. Right, so not only does he publish all this political stuff, right, he also publishes his good friend Joseph Priestley's work promoting Unitarianism, right? And he helps establish the first Unitarian church in London, a church that would run in direct competition with St. Paul's and the Church of England. How is this okay? And apparently someone may have taken exception to his double dealings because his shop and home get destroyed in a fire on the 9th of January 1770. But by August, not even 8 months later, he opens up his new shop at 72 St. Paul's Churchyard, which is the largest on a street of booksellers. Right? And how he managed this feat is unclear, but Johnson cryptically, and I love that word cryptically, told a friend that his friends came about him and set him up again. I guess so. And so just who is this Joseph Johnson, heretofore christened JJ?
Kid of Dynomite!
How can he get away with all this subversion? And unfortunately, the gatekeepers give us very little to work with. I did find this reference to him as the dry bookseller of Below, but couldn't find out anything else about Below. So below what? Below street, below the sky, below the earth? I have no idea. And so if any of my UK friends can help me out with that, that would be amazing. But the gatekeepers do tell us that his father was a Baptist yeoman and that his mother's family was littered with Baptist preachers. And it makes me wonder if they were Anabaptist, right? But regardless, his father being a yeoman is very interesting because of all the various definitions yeoman has, right? And we talked about this a little bit in one of the Poe episodes. Richard Poe of Sherwood Forest was also a yeoman, right? And so a yeoman is someone who either owns or cultivates land, a farmer. But it could also be a middle rank of servitude in a royal or noble household. And so yeomen were archers during the 100 Years' War, which is the war that is celebrated in the Robin Hood ballads. Robin Hood was a yeoman. And there were yeomen in the Navy, right? And it could also be a rank of chivalry falling somewhere between page and squire. And so there are lots of possibilities for JJ's dad. And I think I like being a middle servant in a royal or noble household best, right? Because I think it makes JJ's placement and rise to prominence easiest to swallow. And so I don't know what royal or noble families would have been living in Liverpool at the time, but according to the narrative, Liverpool was exploding as a place of industry during this era. So surely there were some nobility or royalty living thereabouts. And so when Kid Dynomite is 15, his family sends him off to London as apprentice to one George Keith, a London bookseller I don't have a picture of or know much about, other than that he wrote and published religious pamphlets and sermons. And that's another thing. And this is an angle that I think could use a lot more work, right? Sermons were written and published and distributed or sold to churches so that the messaging would be the same. Or alternatively, as a pastor or reverend or whatever, you didn't have to worry about writing sermons, right? They were provided for you. Like I said, this is an angle that needs more work, right? But the thing about Kid Dynomite and his apprenticeship that tips me off as to JJ possibly coming out of a royal or noble house is that the gatekeepers feel the need to tell us that it was unusual for the younger son of a family living in relative obscurity to move to London and become a bookseller. How unusual? And define relative obscurity, right? Because the best that modern scholars can come up with is that George Keith was associated with the Liverpool Baptists. He probably sold them their sermons. And so it would be through this that his apprenticeship was arranged. Right? And this George Keith is amazing. I wish I knew more about him. Right? But just real quick, I did find out that he published a pamphlet called Reflections on the Modern but Unchristian Practice of Inoculation, which when you click on this link, right, and this is amazing, it brings you here to Wiki's vaccine hesitancy page, which is just unbelievable, right? But unfortunately, I couldn't find George Keith's pamphlet, but did find a similarly titled one from 1722, a sermon against the dangerous and sinful practice of inoculation. All right, so 1722, this is over 300 years ago now, right? It's the same algorithmic madness that we just keep cycling through. Right? So not only did George Keith publish one of these, he was also at war with the Quakers. Right? He goes before the clergy of the Church of England and registers this complaint against them. Right? And unfortunately, it's too long to read all of here, but I will share this bit. Right? So I don't understand the nature of their beef, right? But he's defending himself here. And so what he says is, "What I have said of you, the Quakers, as these following events, viz., that you ran, and that the Lord never sent you, and that you were covetous and ambitious, seeking how to please men for your own ends. And it's true that I cried against your philosophy and your universities, saying they are the stews of Antichrist, out of which comes your ignorant, profane, scandalous ministry, and that the generality of you have not the true faith, and that in process of time your whole ministry will consist of ungodly men, the wicked still being preferred by the wicked." Right? I love this guy, George Keith, JJ's master on Paternoster Row. And once JJ is done with his apprenticeship, he kicks around Paternoster Row in the neighborhood, but he doesn't have much success until he hooks up with his good buddy, Joseph Priestley. And Joseph Priestley was an English chemist, natural philosopher, separatist theologian, all right, so more mixing of that religion and science, and that there were so many scientists or natural philosophers who were priests or had a deep religious background is no coincidence. We've talked about that before, right? But Priestley is also a grammarian, helping to control the language as all of these other guys were doing, right? And I love this, right? He was a multi-subject educator and liberal political theorist. Your garden variety polymath. Right? And of course, he was a fellow of the Royal Society, and he publishes over 150 works. Right? He conducts experiments with electricity, and he's the first guy to isolate oxygen as a gas. So it makes him sound like a pretty important science guy. And he takes such a shine to Kid Dynomite that he introduces him to all his religious and Royal Society friends. And thereafter, JJ becomes the primary publisher of Priestley and his buddies. Right? And this includes Benny Franks, right? Alexander Dallas Backey's great-grandpappy, right? He was over there in England hanging with all of these radical liberal dissenting types, of course, right? And he was performing electrical experiments with 90210 over here, of course, right? Because both of them were members of the Lunar Society of Birmingham. And the Lunar Society of Birmingham was a British dinner club and informal learned society of prominent figures in the Midlands Enlightenment. Right? It was so informal, in fact, that no minutes or notes or membership roll exist for this club. The only thing known about it is what can be culled from the correspondence between known members. Right? And it was allegedly founded by Erasmus Darwin, Helmut Head's grandfather. Right? And the only other name in its loose membership that I recognized was William Herschel. And we've talked a little bit about him before. He discovers Uranus, right? Because that's where he likes to look, right? And the Lunar Society meets on the full moon, right? Because allegedly there was more light to travel home with because of the absence of streetlights. Yeah, right. It had nothing to do with practicing ritual moon magic or blood sacrifices at all.
Have you ever seen blood on the moon like that? It appears quite black.
But hopefully I can get into the Lunar Society of Birmingham later, because I want to get back to JJ, the Juice, and all the publishing coming out of St. Paul's Cathedral. Because it's not just on Paternoster Row. It's really this whole area surrounding the church, maybe a couple of square miles with the church as the central hub. And this is where the story starts to go Charlie AF. All right, so now that I've set up the location, and JJ, Kid Dynomite, the cheese to the Juice's wine, let's put the other members of my Publishers Clearinghouse in their places. And so we have Kid Dynomite and his neighbor, George Robinson, another of Godwin's many publishers, right? The Juice runs all through these streets. So much so that his home and the juvenile library are just a couple of blocks away on Skinner Street.
Skinner?
And here it is, right? St. Paul's in full view. And this is just a block away from where George Rutledge sets up his shop, who is just a block away from more good friends and publishers of the Juice, the Johns Murray, who are right near Richard Oil Lamp Taylor, right? They're on Fleet Street. And so if Paternoster Row is almost synonymous with the publishing trade, then Fleet Street was or is synonymous with it. Like one may refer to Wall Street in regards to all things financial or stocks and bonds. In Britain, colloquially, all things that were printed, books, magazines, newspapers, all of that came from Fleet Street, which conveniently enough takes heat off the church in Paternoster Row. And so now, I don't know if these locations are 100% correct for them. Fleet Street is a long street that extends, but I do know that the Macmillans set up shop just a few blocks to the left at Covent Gardens. Right, and so to round out our map here, over to the right at Finsbury Circus, we have James Lackington, an amazing character and someone who I cannot wait to talk about. Right, he was the first publisher of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But we need to start somewhere, right? And so let's start with George Robinson, JJ, Kid Dynamite's neighbor, right? And the gatekeepers let us know that he was baptized on December 20th, 1736. Not born, but baptized. And so should he be Anabaptist? This would happen sometime in adulthood. So who knows how old he was when he died on June 6, 1801. And you get a nice 66 there. And though he was baptized in Dalston, Cumberland, which is in northern England up by the Scottish border, right, he could be from anywhere if he's baptized as an adult. Because according to the gatekeepers, the next thing you know, he just shows up in London in 1755. All right, he could be 19, he could be 40, who knows, right? But he shows up there looking for work, and he lands himself some assistance jobs in and around Paternoster Row and Fleet Street. It's apparently work he takes to because in less than 8 years' time, he and a buddy opened their own shop on Paternoster Row in 1763. But he can't do it without the generous support of this guy, Thomas Longman, who essentially bankrolls George Robinson's bookshop. And so it was while chasing down Longman just how close to the crown this thing could go Charlied into place. And so Thomas Longman here, and just look at the dates on this guy. Born in 1699, right? So you can get a 6 out of that, right? And an 18 here, right? Which is 3 6s. And then there's another 18, which is a triple 6, right? June is a 6. And when you add up 1755, that's an 18 or another set of triple 6s. It's just insane the number of 6s this is, right? So Fancy Pants here, right? He's born into a wealthy soap-making family whose father has a soap shop on Temple Street, which is here, just a stone's throw from all of this action. And I had to move the Murrays out of the way for this. But, at first when I heard that, I was like, soap. But it makes total sense and must have been very lucrative for the Longman family because books are filthy, especially back then with all the ink and whatnot. Publishers, booksellers, and printers got their hands dirty in more ways than one. And whoever was running things over here had some dirty hands, spots that never came off, right? And it's such a genius idea to have a soap shop in this neighborhood. It makes me wonder just how many generations is several generations. How long did the family have this shop, right? Because several generations to me suggests a minimum of 150 years. So that would push their soap shop back to Henry VIII and the usurpation of the Catholic Church by the crown. But my fat senses are telling me that it probably dates back much further, maybe even to the formation of the Stationers' Company in 1403. I don't know, that's just speculation. But unfortunately for Fancy Pants, he loses both of his parents by the time he's 9. But his father makes sure that he's well and handsomely bred and educated. And from his mother, he inherits considerable property in all of these places. All right, so I'm thinking that there must be some real wealth on his mother's side, if not nobility. But I don't know, because while Wiki told me his mother's name was Sarah, and all this land that she gives him, and what his father did for him, when I tried to track down his mother, I got the big nothing. Wah, wah, WikiTree doesn't even know who Fancy Pants' parents are. How is this possible if Wikipedia is able to tell me his mother's name and what his father did for him? And so, unfortunately, I just don't have the time to really track her down, but there has to be money behind this kid, real money, and possibly some nobility too, right? And when he was 17, his guardians apprentice him off for 7 years, or until he's 24 years old. And so I don't know about you, but I'd be pissed if I'm 17 and about to become an adult and possibly inherit all my estates, and then just to be apprenticed off. But he goes along willingly and is apprenticed to one John Osborne. And when I read that name, I was like, John Osborne? Ozzy? Right? And so Ozzy has a shop over on Lombard Street, which is here. Right? And like most of these other guys, he partners up a lot and sells his books all over the place. Books that he publishes like the Cyclopedia, or an Universal Dictionary of Arts and Sciences containing the definitions and terms and accounts of the things signified thereby in the several arts, both liberal and mechanical, and the several sciences, both human and divine. And I love the use of the words several and both together. That's just an interesting dichotomy, right? But the cyclopedia here also includes the figures, kind, properties, productions, preparations, and uses of things natural and artificial, right? Including the rise, progress, and state of things ecclesiastical, civil, military, and commercial, with the several systems, sects, opinions among philosophers, divines, mathematicians, physicians, antiquaries, and critics. The whole intended as a course of ancient and modern learning, compiled by the best authors, dictionaries, journals, memoirs, translations, and ephemera in several languages, both English and Latin. No, I just made that last part up, but what a title page, right? And this 2-volume cyclopedia was just the beginning for Ozzy, right? Because he also has his hands in the universal history, a 65-volume, 65, 6 plus 5 is 11, right? A 65-volume account of history from the earliest account of time, compiled from original authors and illustrated with maps, cuts, and notes. And these works were among the, if not the, earliest English language encyclopedias, gateways to knowledge, right? And the power to dictate what the future knows about the past must have been intoxicating, because that's what he and these other publishers and booksellers were doing. But regardless, Ozzy goes on to become Fancy Pants' father-in-law, and he convinces Fancy Pants to buy the business of one William Taylor, who was the first person to publish Robinson Crusoe in 1719, right? And this connection set my fat senses alight, right? Because I had looked into Robinson Crusoe a little while back, because he was one of the tableaus at Mrs. Jarley's Waxworks party of 1872, where the part of Robinson Crusoe was played by Stuart Latrobe, right? And I'm sure that's no coincidence, right? And since the gatekeepers offered me nothing on William Taylor, publisher of Robinson Crusoe, this being the entirety of his wiki page, I remembered that I had found this book on Robinson Crusoe and its printing from 1719 to 1731, written by Henry Clinton Hutchins, right? And this was a limited edition volume. Only 350 of these were made. And that tells you a little bit about just how in demand this knowledge is, right? And how just a few copies of something can be used as source material for many volumes of other things, right? And so this book was published by Columbia University in 1925, right? And I love that the university press seal still has the crown in it in 1925, though it hasn't had royal associations since America won its war for independence, right? Changing its name from King's College to Columbia after the Revolutionary War, of course, because it no longer had royal ties. So Columbia University could possibly be betraying, or perhaps even portraying, its true boss here. And this book blows this whole thing wide open. And so this is where we'll pick it up in the next privately pressed episode, right? With William Taylor, Robinson Crusoe, and the insane amount of Charlieing that's to come. Remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And so until the next one, cheers.